I woke up to red and blue lights flashing through my bedroom window. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but then I heard the loud bang, bang, bang on my front door. Open up, it's the police. My heart nearly jumped out of my chest. I stumbled out of bed, tripping over my slippers, still in my pajamas, trying to figure out what in the world was happening. When I finally opened the door, there were two cops standing on my porch with a flashlight shining right into my eyes. Behind them, 4 police cruisers lined the curb, lights swirling like a disco ball from hell. My quiet cul-de-sac looked like a crime scene. And there she was, standing tall in her pink, fuzzy bathrobe, arms crossed like a prison warden, was Karen, our neighborhood's most dramatic HOA board member. Her short, platinum hair was curled to perfection, even at this hour, and her lips were painted a deep red that practically glowed in the dark. She pointed at me like I had just robbed a bank. "There he is," she shouted. "That's the one. He refused to move his Jeep so my guests could park for my daughter's engagement brunch. He's blocking the whole driveway. This is a crime." The officer turned back to me, eyebrows raised. "Sir, is this true?" I was too stunned to speak. Why were the police at my house at 4 a.m. over a parking spot? But before I could explain a thing, Karen screamed. "He threatened me. I felt unsafe. I want him charged." My jaw dropped. I hadn't even spoken to her since last weekend's HOA meeting, when she tried to fine me 100 for having unsightly garden gnomes. And now, she was screaming in front of my house, with the police claiming I threatened her over a car in my own driveway. I knew this wasn't just about parking. This was war. But what Karen didn't know is that I had cameras, lots of them, and they had been rolling all night. My hands were still shaking when I let the officers into the house. "Can I put on some pants first?" I muttered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Go ahead," one of them said, not unkindly, but his eyes kept flicking toward the hallway, where Karen stood outside yelling into her phone. "Tell them to tow it. I don't care if it's his driveway. I want that Jeep gone before sunrise." Sunrise? That was still at least 2 hours away. My phone said it was 4:13 a.m. I hurried into my room, threw on a hoodie and some jeans, then grabbed the USB stick from my nightstand. It was connected to the outside security cameras, a full set of 8 that I'd installed after Karen accidentally backed into my mailbox last year and denied it. I returned to the living room, plugged the USB into my laptop, and opened the video feed from earlier that night. "Officers," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "you might want to see this before you make any decisions." They gathered around as I rewound the footage, and what we saw was honestly ridiculous. 3:40, 1 a.m. Karen, in her bathrobe and slippers, pacing up and down the sidewalk like a drill sergeant. 2 younger women were standing beside her. Own was her daughter, clearly exhausted in a glittery party dress, and the other was on the phone, holding a clipboard and muttering about catering. Karen marched up to my Jeep, stood with her hands on her hips, and yelled, "Whose car is this?" Then she stormed up to my front door and rang the bell 3 times. No answer. I was asleep. She started banging on the door, then kicking it lightly with her foot. Then she did something insane. She pulled out her phone, dialed 911, and said, "Yes. Hi. I'm being threatened by a large, aggressive man who refuses to let my guests park. He's screaming at me through the door and won't let me leave." We all stared at the screen. The officers looked at each other. "Did she just fake a 911 call?" one of them whispered. I nodded. "And I never even woke up until you guys showed up." One of the officers stood up straight, jaw tight. "You said there are more cameras. Front porch, side yard, driveway, and backyard. You mind if we take a look?" "Nope. Be my guest." As they started going through the rest of the footage, I stepped outside onto the porch. Karen was still ranting on the phone, but she froze when she saw me. "What are you smiling about?" she snapped. I just pointed at my roof. "Smile for the cameras, Karen." Her face drained of color. "I what?" Before she could finish, one of the officers stepped out behind me. "Ma'am," he said sternly, "we're going to need you to stay right here while we investigate further. This may be a case of filing a false police report." Karen looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. "You can't be serious. He's the one blocking public access." "It's his private driveway," the officer said, unmoved. "And you told dispatch he was threatening you. The video shows otherwise." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. And then, like clockwork, another car pulled up to the curb. A gold SUV. Out came an older man in a tuxedo and a woman in a long purple dress, clearly guests for this so-called engagement brunch. The woman looked around and blinked at the lights. "Karen, what on earth is going on?" she asked. Karen didn't answer, but her daughter, who had been quietly leaning against the porch railing, sighed and said, "She called the cops because the neighbor wouldn't let people park in his driveway." The woman in purple gasped. "Are you serious? Again?" "Again." The plot thickened. Meanwhile, the officers were still watching the rest of my camera footage, and that's when it got even worse for Karen. 2:50, 3 a.m., Karen and her daughter dragging folding tables into the center of the cul-de-sac. 3:12 a.m., a man unloading chairs from the back of a van and stacking them on my front lawn without asking. 3:27 a.m., Karen planting handmade paper signs along the street that read, "Reserved parking, engagement brunch." 4 a.m. to 8 a.m., including one taped to my mailbox. She had turned the neighborhood into her personal party venue while we all slept. One of the officers came back outside, shaking his head. "Ma'am, we have more footage. You've not only falsely reported a crime, but you've also tampered with private property." Karen's eyes bulged. "This is a misunderstanding." The officer raised his hand. "That's for a judge to decide." And then, in a moment so surreal I almost laughed, they placed Karen in handcuffs. "No, you can't do this. I'm the HOA vice president." The other officer shrugged. "Then maybe the HOA should re-elect." As they walked her to the cruiser, Karen thrashed. "This isn't over. You hear me? This is harassment. I know my rights." I stood frozen, mouth dry, adrenaline pounding through my veins. The entire street was awake now. Lights turned on, doors opened, sleepy neighbors peeking out to see what was going on. I glanced at the paper sign still flapping on my mailbox. Yeah, sure, Karen. I was about to tear it down when I noticed something strange. The man who had unloaded chairs onto my lawn earlier, he was still here, but now he was in my backyard, carrying something heavy. I narrowed my eyes. I crept down the side of my house, staying low behind the bushes. My heart was thudding in my ears like a drum line. The man in the backyard was big over 6 feet tall, easy with a thick beard and a wrinkled tuxedo jacket. He was carrying a black trash bag slung over one shoulder like it was full of bricks. He hadn't seen me yet. I pulled out my phone, started recording, and whispered into it. 4:37 a.m. Unknown man trespassing in my yard, possibly dumping something. Then I stepped out from behind the bush. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" The man spun around like he'd been caught stealing candy. Whoa, chill, man," he said, holding up a hand. "Karen told me to put this back here." "What is that?" I demanded, pointing to the trash bag. He hesitated, then dropped the bag to the ground with a dull thud. "Just some leftover food, decorations, trash from the van. You can't just dump things in someone's yard. Look, I don't want trouble, okay?" He stepped back, both palms up. "Karen said this was all approved. She said you were part of the HOA. I snorted. "Karen says a lot of things. Like that I threatened her, which I didn't. She's in handcuffs right now." His eyes widened. "Wait, what?" "Yeah. So unless you want to join her, you better start explaining what's really in that bag." The man looked down at it, then took off running. I yelled and took off after him. We raced around the side of the house, across my front lawn, and into the street where the flashing police lights were still strobing. He made it halfway to the corner before two of the officers spotted him. "Hey, stop!" They tackled him like linebackers. In less than a minute, he was face down on the sidewalk, hands behind his back. One of the guests in the purple dress screamed. Karen's daughter looked horrified. "What's going on now?" one of the officers asked me. "He was in my backyard," said Karen told him to dump trash behind my shed. We all walked back to the yard together. The officer poked the black bag with a gloved hand. It didn't feel like trash. It felt too solid. He carefully unzipped the bag. A stack of folded, custom-printed Karen's Bridal Brunch signs. 2 unopened champagne bottles. A half-used roll of pink velvet table runner. Several packets of raw chicken. And a small silver box, locked. "What's this?" the officer muttered, pulling the box out. He shook it lightly. Something inside clinked. Karen, still sitting cuffed in the back of the cruiser, saw us holding the box. Her eyes went wide with panic. "Don't open that. That's private, you can't." But the officer was already twisting open the latch with a pen. Inside were 3 things. A USB stick labeled HOA Bribery Fund. A checkbook registered to Central Community HOA Emergency Fund. And a long list of names, with dollar amounts written next to each. "Oh, wow," the officer murmured. The other one glanced over his shoulder. "Is that what I think it is?" "Yup. Looks like Karen's been running more than just brunches." Suddenly, the whole story was changing. This wasn't just a parking war. Karen had been hiding a lot more than guests in my driveway. The cops quietly radioed for backup, while one of them walked the silver box back to the cruiser. Karen started screaming again. "That's evidence. That's mine. I demand a lawyer. You can't prove anything. This is all his fault." Everyone turned to look at me. "You," she hissed. "You're the reason this is happening." I folded my arms. "Actually, Karen, I think you're the reason this is happening." As the morning sun started rising over the rooftops, the neighborhood that once worshipped Karen's every rule was now watching her unravel in real time. Even the ones who used to back her up were standing on their porches, shaking their heads. I heard whispers from across the street. She used our dues money for this? Did she really call 911 over a driveway? I knew something was fishy about that lady, but this wasn't over yet. Because that USB stick? It held something even worse. The officer plugged it into his cruiser's laptop. I watched his expression change, first confusion, then shock, then fury. He stepped back out and called for me. "Sir," he said slowly, "I think you're going to want to see this." I leaned over his shoulder. The video started with Karen, in her home office, leaning close to the camera. "If this ever gets out, I'm done. So this is the backup. This is the plan. If anyone ever turns on me, especially that Jeep guy, I'll release the letters. I'll say he threatened me. I'll burn his record. No one will ever believe a word he says again." She laughed, like a villain in a movie. Then she looked right at the lens and whispered, "Let him try. I always win." Karen's face, frozen mid-laugh on the laptop screen, haunted me. It was like watching a movie villain monologue, except this was real life. She had planned to destroy me. She had recorded a whole video outlining her threats. And those letters she mentioned? They weren't just idle words. They were something much, much darker. The officer looked up at me, his face pale in the early morning light. "We're going to need a search warrant for her house. Can I see the rest of the video?" I asked, my throat dry. He nodded and hit play. The screen flickered to a second clip. Karen sat at the same desk, this time holding a small bundle of envelopes. Each was sealed and labeled. HOA member blackmail file. Evidence against Jeep man. Emergency release use if arrested. She lifted one to the camera. "This one's for you, Harold. If you don't vote the way I want, I'll make sure everyone sees that little misunderstanding with your fence permit." She laughed again. "I have dirt on everyone. No one crosses me and walks away clean." The video cut off. And just like that, the web started unraveling. 6:23 a.m. The sun had barely crested the horizon when more squad cars arrived. Karen sat slumped in the back seat of the cruiser, still muttering angrily under her breath. Her daughter had disappeared inside the house, refusing to speak to anyone. The guests had all fled, leaving behind half-empty mimosa glasses, party favors, and one very confused saxophone player who hadn't realized his gig would end with police tape. One of the detectives approached me. "We've executed a search warrant. Would you like to be present when we search?" I hesitated. Yeah, absolutely. They let me stand at the edge of her property as they entered through the front door. It didn't take long. Just 30 minutes later, they emerged with a locked drawer, pried open, and a shoebox full of sealed envelopes each, one more damning than the last. Inside were copies of HOA complaints that were never filed, threats that looked like they came from other residents but were clearly forged by Karen, and personal info she had collected on almost everyone in the neighborhood. Birthdays, kids' names, surveillance photos, even one of me sitting in my backyard last summer. She had been building files on everyone. That's when the HOA president, a balding man named Barry with sweat stains under his arms, stormed onto the lawn. "What is going on here?" he barked. "Someone tell me why I got a call saying Karen's been arrested. This has to be a mistake." The officer handed him a pair of latex gloves and pointed to the evidence box. Barry opened it, and his face changed color, went from red to gray in seconds. These are our HOA documents," he said in disbelief. "This is illegal. She wasn't even supposed to have access to this. That's when one of the officers pulled out a folder labeled. Barry blinked. What the? Inside were printed plans Karen had created, step-by-step blueprints on how to reclaim and repurpose unused driveways in the neighborhood. She had detailed arguments, fake legal citations, and even sample complaint letters designed to harass people into giving up property access during HOA events. She wasn't just trying to take my driveway. She had plans to take everyone's. Do you see now? I said to Barry, who still looked like he'd seen a ghost. She tried to get me arrested over a Jeep. At 4 a.m., Barry looked down at the files. She's done. No more HOA. No more board. I'll call an emergency vote this afternoon. But just as we were starting to feel a sense of justice, a new twist dropped. A woman stepped forward from the growing crowd of neighbors. Middle-aged, glasses, gardening gloves still on. "To think I have something you all need to hear," she said nervously. She opened her phone and pulled up a voicemail. It was Karen. "Don't forget, we all agreed to this. If anyone tries to betray me, remember, I have the video from the March meeting, the one where we voted on the fundraiser money. If I go down, so does everyone else." The neighbor looked around, suddenly unsure. "What does that mean?" The HOA board members looked panicked. Barry shook his head. That video doesn't exist. She's bluffing." But now, the seed was planted. People were turning on each other. Someone whispered, "Didn't you approve that catering bill for 6-0? Another whispered, "Wasn't Karen at your pool party? The one that used HOA funds for floats?" Paranoia spread like wildfire. The neighborhood wasn't just unraveling around Karenet, was eating itself alive. And I stood in the middle of it, somehow the eye of the storm. Until I got a text from an unknown number. "You've seen too much. Stay quiet, or next time it won't be a Jeep." I looked up. The crowd. The chaos. Somewhere out there, someone else was still working with Karen. "You've seen too much. Stay quiet, or next time it won't be a Jeep." I felt a cold ripple shoot down my spine. I looked up from my phone. The crowd was still buzzing, neighbors accusing neighbors, board members whispering nervously, trying to cover their tracks. Karen, red-eyed and furious, still locked in the back of the cruiser, now rocking slightly as if she were trying to figure out how to escape. And somewhere among them, someone else had my number. Someone didn't want the truth to come out. Someone was still playing Karen's game. I turned to the officer who had helped me earlier. "I just got a threat." He raised an eyebrow. "From Karen?" I shook my head and held out the screen. "No, unknown number." He frowned and flagged down another officer. "We need a tech trace now. This just became bigger than fraud." It was supposed to be held in the community center. Instead, people flooded the cul-de-sac. Folding chairs were dragged from garages. Neighbors sat on coolers, curbs, even on top of mailboxes. It felt less like a meeting and more like a trial. Karen's arrest had shaken everyone but the files found in her house. The blackmail, the Operation Driveway plan, that had shattered the neighborhood. Barry, sweating bullets, stood in front of the crowd, holding a megaphone and trying to restore some kind of order. "Tu didn't know what Karen was doing," he stammered. "She kept the board in the dark. I moved to dissolve the current HOA structure." "She had videos of you voting on illegal funding," someone shouted. You signed the check for the petting zoo at her fake wedding, another accused. She let her guests use my sprinkler hookup. I paid $400 on my water bill. The crowd exploded. I sat back on my lawn chair like I was watching live reality TV, until someone behind me muttered, "We should have never let her in charge in the first place. She said she'd protect us from them." I turned. Them who? The woman blinked at me, like she'd said too much. "Forget it." "No," I said, standing. "You think this goes deeper? That Karen wasn't just a rogue HOA nut?" She hesitated, then slowly nodded. She used to talk about this network, other HOAs across the state, even some kind of online group. They shared strategies what worked to keep neighborhoods in line, how to push back when homeowners fought back. I raised my eyebrows. "You're saying Karen was part of some kind of HOA cult?" She didn't smile. "I'm saying she wasn't working alone, and she's not the only one who knows how to use threats." Back at my house, 3 a.m. Police texts worked fast. They traced the number that had sent me the threatening text. It didn't lead to Karen's phone. It led to a prepaid burner cell. Bought 2 towns over. Paid in cash. But security footage from the store? It showed Barry buying the phone 3 days before the wedding. When the police confronted him, Barry broke down. "She said she'd ruin me," he sobbed. "Said she had pictures. I didn't know what else to do. I just wanted to keep my job." "Your job is running the neighborhood potluck, Barry," the officer snapped. "Not covering up a criminal enterprise." Barry was arrested on the spot. That made 2 HOA board members down in one day. And it wasn't over yet. Just when we thought the storm was over, it hit again. A video appeared in the neighborhood group chat. Not from Karen's phone, but from an anonymous account. It was a pre-recorded message. Karen sat in her living room, sipping wine, wearing a tiara, as if nothing had happened. "If you're seeing this," she said, "it means they've arrested me. Shame. I always thought I'd go out with more flair." She smiled. "But don't worry, friends. I didn't go down without a plan. Remember that old mailbox by the tennis courts? The one I told the board never to remove? Yeah, might want to dig a few feet under it." The video ended. 3 officers and a shovel later, they found it. A buried safe. Inside, a second USB drive, and a notebook. The drive contained every piece of HOA dirt you could imagine. Secret votes, illicit payments, hidden documents, even a full recording of a board member admitting to pocketing landscaping funds. But the notebook? That's where the real bomb was. It held my name, with a bullet point list beneath it. Planted evidence in his shed, never executed. Anonymous complaint to employer drafted. Jeep violation. Final strike attempt. She was planning to take me down, completely. And if I hadn't stood my ground that night, if I had moved my Jeep at 4 a.m., none of this would have ever been uncovered. The HOA would still be running their shady operation. The driveways, the blackmail, the lies, all of it. Karen's trial is still months away, but she's facing over a dozen charges, and the state has launched a broader investigation into HOA fraud rings. The neighborhood voted to dissolve the HOA entirely. The sign was taken down. The bylaws were burned in a bonfire. Neighbors now smile at each other. Kids play in the front yards. I even saw one person paint their mailbox purple without getting a letter. And me? I parked my Jeep sideways across my own driveway just because I could. A neighbor walked by and laughed. Aren't you afraid Karen's ghost is going to file a complaint? I grinned. She can try. It started with a postcard. Just a plain white card with no return address. No stamp either. Just slid under my front door while I was watching TV one evening. I picked it up, confused. On the front was a photo of a perfectly trimmed lawn. On the back, in bold red Sharpie, were 4 chilling words. The HOA never dies. I stared at it for a full minute. Was it a prank? A joke? But the handwriting, I'd seen it before. On old HOA notices, on warning letters. It was Karen's. The woman was in jail. How the heck was she still sending messages? The next morning, something's off. I went out to check my mailbox. It was gone. Just gone. The wooden post still stood there, but the box had been ripped off entirely, like someone had yanked it off with a crowbar. No note, no package, no clue. Until I turned around. Spray painted in red across my garage. It was like deja vu, but worse. Because the HOA was dissolved, officially, legally, burned to a crisp at the bonfire. So who was doing this? My Jeep gets towed again. It happened at 2:13 a.m. I heard the clanking, the metal-on-metal squeal. I ran outside in boxers and socks to see a tow truck already pulling away with my Jeep strapped on the back. "Hey, that's my car!" I screamed, chasing it barefoot down the street. But it was gone before I could get a plate. I called the police. Again. They ran every towing company in the area. None of them had records of towing anything on my block that night. It was an illegal tow. My Jeep had been taken by someone impersonating a tow service. A neighbor across the street said he thought it was just Karen stuff again and went back to bed. But that was impossible, wasn't it? The next day, I did something reckless. I visited Karen, in jail. At first, she just sat there behind the glass, smug as ever, like this was all part of some long game she had already won. Then she leaned in. "You thought this ended with me?" she whispered. "You only exposed one chapter. There are others, quiet ones. We call ourselves the Covenants." I stared at her. She smiled wider. "You ever wonder how I got so powerful so fast? It wasn't just me. I had help. From above. And now, the circle's closed." Then she hung up the phone on her side of the glass. That night, I went online. Searched every HOA-related forum, dark web archive, and thread I could find. Most of it was junk. Until I found a private group. Locked. Invite only. But it had a name I couldn't ignore. The icon? A set of golden keys over a red door. A chill ran through me. I requested access under a fake account. Hours passed. No reply. Then, just before midnight, my screen flashed. "You've been granted probationary access." The first post I saw read, "Phase 2 activated. Suburb 6 is under reclamation. The dissenter has been marked." And there was a photo underneath it. A grainy, low-light image of me standing in my driveway. Taken that night. From across the street. I sprinted outside, spun around, looked at every window, every bush, every car. Then I saw it. A shadow. Ducking behind the fence in the abandoned lot down the road. I grabbed a flashlight and ran after it. "Hey, who are you?" I rounded the corner and froze. There, carved into the wooden fence in giant, messy letters, "Karen lives on," and underneath it, something that hadn't been there before. A crudely nailed-up wooden sign. "Whole reformed. All rules apply." The sign was still there in the morning. Crude, splintered, hammered into the wooden fence like a twisted monument to madness. "Whole reformed. All rules apply." I stood in my driveway, sipping coffee, staring at it like I was waiting for it to blink. Part of me hoped it was just some bored teenagers pulling an elaborate prank. But deep down, I knew this was no prank. This was a declaration of war. 10:42 a.m. Neighborhood paperwork appears. I was about to head inside when I noticed a paper fluttering in the wind by my mailbox post. The mailbox was still missing, so it had been duct taped to the wood. A violation notice. Typed. Formatted. Exactly like the old HOA letter, same layout, same font, same tone. But at the top, something new. Reconstituted HOA of Pine Oak Ridge, Temporary Council, Interim Chairperson, N. Interim Chairperson, N. No name? The violation? Improper vehicle storage Jeep must be parked within guidelines outlined in Section 8C. There was no Section 8C. We burned the bylaws. But this was an attempt to resurrect them. Some group was trying to bring the HOA back, secretly, illegally, and they weren't hiding anymore. 2:15 p.m. The neighborhood turns. I thought I was the only one being targeted. Until my neighbor, Mrs. Gunter, an elderly woman who always wore enormous sun hats and baked zucchini bread for anyone who asked, knocked on my door in tears. "They shut off my power," she whispered, shaking. I thought it was a mistake, but then I got this. She handed me another violation letter. This one read, "Lawn overgrowth. Failure to prune roses. Electrical services suspended per council authority, per Section 11E. My jaw dropped. They had control of utilities. I raced over to the community Facebook page. Dead. Taken offline. Even the admin Barry's old assistant was gone without a trace. Then a new group appeared. Pine Oak Residents. Order Restoration. It had 3 posts. The first was a welcome message. The second was a PDF of revised bylaws. The third was a poll. Do you support the quiet reformation of the HOA under temporary leadership until stability returns? The yes votes? Overwhelming. But I knew most of those names. Many were dead accounts, bots, fakes. It was rigged. They were pretending to hold a vote, to make the HOA look legitimate again. I wasn't going to take this sitting down. Karen may have started this, but someone or something had picked up where she left off. So I reached out to 4 neighbors I trusted, the ones who had helped me expose Karen. We met in my garage, lights off, windows covered. "We need to find out who's behind this," I said. "There's a fake board, fake rules. They're impersonating power they don't have, and people are getting hurt." "What's the plan?" asked Jordan, the ex-Marine who lived down the street. "We dig, literally, figuratively. We find where they're running this from. They're printing notices, setting up burner emails. It has to be coming from inside the neighborhood." 9, 12 p.m. The van, that night, Jordan spotted it. A matte black cargo van parked just beyond the old tennis court where the buried USB had been found weeks ago. No plates, no markings, but wires trailed from the side door into the nearby utility box. We waited until 1 a.m., then made our move, creeping through the dark with flashlights and walkie-talkies, like we were kids on a spy mission. Jordan disabled the backup generator. The fence lights cut out. The court went black. Then I opened the van door. What I saw made my stomach twist. Inside was a whole mobile command center. Laptops, printers, a camera system that fed live security footage from around the neighborhood. At the center was a corkboard covered in Polaroids of every resident, with notes. Mine had a big red X through it. Target, instigator, neutralize. As I took a step back, the screen on the main laptop flickered to life on its own. A video feed loaded. It was Karen, not from jail, from a house. A log cabin, by the look of it. Secluded. Remote. No prison bars. No orange jumpsuit. She looked right into the camera, like she was expecting me. "You found the van," she said calmly. "Good. That means we're ready for Phase 3. Welcome to the real HOA war." The screen cut to black. A second later, my phone buzzed with a new message. "Phase 3 begins at dawn. You can't stop it. You're already on the list." I didn't sleep that night. Not a minute. I sat on my porch with a baseball bat in one hand, a flashlight in the other, and my phone buzzing every hour with a fresh notice from the fake HOA. Each one more unhinged than the last. Violation. Breathing at night above 55 dB. Cease heavy inhalation immediately. Violation. Failure to acknowledge new management. Compliance is mandatory. Final warning. Phase 3 will not be delayed for any dissenter. It felt like I was living in a suburban horror movie written by a very bitter HOA president with a god complex. Exactly 4:00 a.m. An alarm went off, not mine. Not from a neighbor, but through the entire neighborhood. A high-pitched screech, like an air raid siren, blasting from hidden speakers. Then lights flicked on. Every street lamp, every motion sensor, every porch bulb, even mine, blazed bright white. And a new message crackled through a speaker somewhere. All non-compliant residents step outside for inspection. HOA Order 3.6 is in effect. People started coming out of their homes, rubbing their eyes in confusion. But not everyone. Because the list Karen had mentioned, it was real, and I was on it. I barely had time to grab my phone before I heard footsteps pounding up my porch. 3 masked figures in all black tackled me before I could react. No words. No hesitation. One of them shoved a burlap sack over my head and zip-tied my hands behind my back. I was thrown into a van, probably the same one from the tennis court. It reeked of printer ink and something sour. Then we were moving. When the bag came off, I was inside an old wreck, center the abandoned HOA office. But now it was transformed. Black curtains covered the windows. Security monitors lined the walls. And seated behind a long fold-out table were 7 figures in business suits, wearing identical black masks. One of them cleared their throat and began reading from a script. Resident has failed to comply with 4 critical restoration mandates. By order of the interim board, this tribunal is now in session. What the heck is this? I shouted. You can't just drag people from their homes. A gavel slammed down on a makeshift podium. Silence. This is a hearing, not a debate. You have been identified as the root of HOA decay and civil disorder. Your actions led to the destruction of order, and we, the board reborn, intend to restore it. I laughed. I couldn't help it. You're just cosplaying as a fake HOA in a creepy old gym? This isn't order. This is a cult with bylaws. One of the masked figures leaned in and whispered, You think we're fake? We were never fake. We were dormant, waiting. Karen was only the spark. We are the flame. 5:23 a.m. A choice. They slid a thick envelope across the table to me. Inside was a contract. In legal language thicker than molasses, it spelled out my choices. Sign and rejoin the HOA. Immediate compliance. Loss of independent property rights. Full surveillance acceptance. Refuse and be exiled. My home, sold at auction by legal loophole. Power, water, and internet cut. Total blacklisting from covenant communities. I looked them dead in the eyes. Then I spit on the paper. 6:00 a.m. Eviction order. I was dragged outside, dumped on my own lawn. A new sign had already been hammered into the ground in front of my house. Uncompliant. Property pending reclamation. And across the street, a massive moving truck pulling into my driveway. People in official-looking uniforms, none I'd seen before, began marching toward my front door with boxes and clipboards. They were going to kick me out of my own house. At dawn, with the whole neighborhood watching. And then I saw her, Karen, standing on the sidewalk, holding a cup of coffee, dressed in full suburban glam, smirking like she'd just won a game of chess. She waved. Good morning, she called sweetly. I heard you're moving. I clenched my fists. My house, my driveway, my Jeep, my life. And Karen? She wasn't behind bars anymore. She was leading them. But what she didn't know, she'd made one huge mistake. Because I still had the original USB, the one with all her HOA dirt, and I wasn't done yet. I was going to bring it all down. The truck was halfway up my driveway when I made my move. I didn't wait to argue. I didn't yell. I ran. Not away. Inside. I bolted through the front door, slammed it shut, and locked every bolt, latch, and deadlock. Then I sprinted to the crawl space under the stairs and ripped open a loose floorboard. There it was. The old dust-covered shoebox with a backup USB drive. Karen thought she deleted everything when she was arrested months ago. But I had copied the files to a hidden drive just in case she ever came back. And now, she had. Worse, she'd brought reinforcements. 6:09 a.m. The eviction crew pounds. Bang, bang, bang. This is your final warning. Comply or face removal under Section 13G of the Restoration Bylaws. I peeked through the blinds. They weren't normal movers. No company logos. No friendly clipboard guys. They wore tactical vests that said, not a company. Not government. Just 3 letters. Private residential order. My jaw dropped. I recognized them. Karen had once mentioned in a smug HOA meeting back when she was just a menace with a newsletter that she'd been in contact with outside help, a consulting group that specialized in community obedience strategies. Now they were real, and they were here. 6:22 a.m. Upload begins. I plugged the USB into my laptop and fired up every account. I had social media, community forums, even a backup Reddit profile called HOA Survivorone. The files included Karen's secret emails begging contractors to fake violations, bank transfers from HOA accounts to shell companies she controlled, surveillance footage of her admitting she'd called 911 to make a point, her own handwritten plans for Phase 3 months before she claimed it all just happened. I hit upload all. Then I watched the progress bar crawl up. 14%, 27%. But just as it hit 48%, blackout. Everything went dark. 6:24 a.m. It wasn't just my power. The whole neighborhood lost power. The lights across the street blinked out like dominoes. The siren system shut off. Even the creepy HOA van, dead. No engines, no phones, no internet. They had used some kind of portable EMP to kill all electronics within a few blocks. This wasn't a simple HOA takedown anymore. This was full-on urban warfare. And I was on the front line. While rummaging through the closet for candles, I found my old battery-powered emergency radio. I flipped it on. Static. Then something cut through. A woman's voice. "This is Resistance Point 7. If you're hearing this, the HOA isn't just yours. They've spread. Tennessee, Georgia, parts of Florida are tracking confirmed takeovers. They move fast. We need to regroup. Trust no one in uniform. We meet at the coordinates below." I froze. There were others. I wasn't the only one fighting back. She didn't break the door this time. She knocked. 3 sharp raps. Like a teacher calling a student to attention. I didn't answer. Then I heard her voice, calm, polite, with that perfect Stepford smile behind it. "Look, I admire your fight. I really do. But this is bigger than you now. Bigger than all of us. You can't stop it. But you can join it. You're smart. You know how to get people's attention. We could use someone like you on the inside." I stayed silent. She continued. "You think this is about rules and lawn care? This is control, order, power. People crave it, even if they deny it. That's why we're winning." Then she added, almost gently, "Your little upload, it didn't go through. The moment you plugged that drive in, we saw everything." Silence. Then she said, "You're officially invited to the national board," and walked away. 8:30 a.m. A message from the resistance. I rigged a basic antenna using jumper cables and my Jeep's hood. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. I picked up the Resistance's next broadcast. A man's voice this time. "If you've been blacklisted, if you've been targeted, if your neighborhood has fallen jet out, now, regroup. We're organizing. First meeting is in 2 days. Bring proof. Bring allies. And remember, they may wear HOA badges, but they're just scared little people with too much paper." I packed a go bag with the USB drive, some printed files, granola bars, and a wrench. Then I went to my Jeep. The tires were slashed. The hood had been spray painted with bright red letters. Traitor. As I stood there, in the early morning sun, surrounded by the ruins of my peaceful life, I knew what had to happen next. If Karen was building an empire, then I was going to burn it down from the inside. But first, I had to escape the neighborhood alive. 9:12 a.m. Neighborhood on lockdown. I never thought I'd be planning an escape from a gated community like it was a maximum security prison, but here we were. The exits were blocked. The usual neighborhood watch booths had been replaced with massive steel gates, manned by PRO enforcers in mirrored shades and black gloves. They held clipboards and stun guns. Every car leaving was stopped, searched, logged, and mine, still dead. 4 tires slashed, hood tagged with traitor. I couldn't walk out either. Drone patrols buzzed overhead every 15 minutes. HOA-branded golf carts rolled by with motion sensors and bullhorns blasting, "Remember, order is freedom." My peaceful cul-de-sac had become a suburban dictatorship. 9:37 a.m. Help from the unlikeliest neighbor. I was just about to sneak out the back fence when I heard a hiss from behind the garden gnome next door. "Bust in here." It was Old Man Grady, the neighborhood's resident grump. He was usually the first to file noise complaints and the last to say hello. But today, he opened his garage like Batman opening the Batcave. Inside, a freaking fortress. Steel shutters. Signal jammers. A backup generator. Even a secret hatch beneath his tool bench. "You think you're the only one they've blacklisted?" he muttered. "I've been off their radar for 2 years. HOA tried to find me for putting in solar panels. I built a bunker instead." I nodded slowly. "You're my new best friend." 10:05 a.m. The plan. We had exactly 1 shot. Grady still had an old electric scooter, ancient, rusty, and looked like it could barely outrun a turtle. But it was small, silent, and wouldn't get flagged on their systems. He handed me a decoy vest like the ones the PRO guys wore and a fake clipboard. "You're going out the service gate," he said. "Play it cool. Nod. Act annoyed. They expect obedience, not eye contact. If they stop you, hand them this form claims you're on garbage detail. What if they check it? They won't. HOA paperwork is so bloated, they won't even read the first line." He paused. "But if they do, run." 10:40 a.m. Gate of Doom. I approached the South Service gate. Heart pounding. Fingers sweating on the handlebars of the old scooter. The 2 guards looked up. I nodded with the kind of fake confidence I hadn't felt since my high school math test bluff. One raised an eyebrow. "Where you headed?" I held up the clipboard. "Trash run. Route B7 Alpha." He looked down at the form, then at me, then back at the form. "You're not on today's cycle." My mouth dried out. "Special assignment." Karen signed it herself. He stiffened at her name, then grunted. "Move along." I was through. 10:53 a.m. Free at last, but not for long. I zipped down the hill as fast as that rickety scooter could carry me. The trees thinned. The air felt lighter. I could feel freedom. Until I heard the siren. Red and blue lights flashed behind me. Not police. A drone SUV fully autonomous HOA patrol. It started tailing me, barking through its speaker. Unauthorized exit detected. Pull over for community correction. I did not pull over. Instead, I ditched the scooter into a ditch and dove into the woods. Branches whipped my face. My lungs burned. I ran like my house was on fire, and in a way, it was. I didn't stop until I reached the edge of town. 11:30 a.m. The resistance camp. It was hidden in an abandoned RV park behind a shuttered gas station just outside the HOA's reach. I stumbled in, scratched, muddy, panting. They saw me coming, and one woman raised a crossbow. "Who are you?" she barked. I held up the USB. "I've got the files. I've got the proof, and I know how they think." Another man stepped forward. A patch on his jacket read, "Zone Leader, Tennessee." He looked me up and down. "Welcome to the fight." They led me to a tent with a large map. Markers, pins, circles drawn in red. Neighborhoods across the country. Some taken, some resisting, some already gone dark. And in the center of the map, circled 3 times in black ink, was the word headquarters. I pointed. "What's that?" The leader looked grim. "That's where it all began. The first HOA, the mother nest. If we're going to stop this," he tapped the map, "we have to go there." And Karen? She was already on her way. 12:01 p.m. The target. Inside the resistance tent, the leaders formed a tight circle around the map. The marker hovered over a sleepy little suburb in Virginia Red Vale Hills. It looked ordinary, generic, the kind of place where people mow their lawns at 7 a.m. and argue over fence height. But this place, it wasn't ordinary. It was the birthplace of the HOA virus. The very first neighborhood Karen helped revive before she spread her twisted gospel of order through obedience across the country. It was where she perfected her methods, where they trained the first PRO enforcers, where the original files were stored, and it was where Karen had gone. To activate Phase 4. 12:22 p.m. Mission briefing. The plan was clear. Or at least, it was supposed to be. "We go in quiet," said Max, the resistance leader with a tactical vest and a permanent 5 o'clock shadow. "Red Vale's perimeter is tight. Motion sensors, face recognition gates, decoy homes." "Decoy homes?" I asked. "Yeah," said the woman with the crossbow jewels. "Fake houses. Just hollow shells with cameras and mics inside. You knock on the door, and boom, you're flagged." They handed me a resistance badge and a new outfit. Khakis, a pastel polo, and boat shoes. "You want to walk among the elite?" Max smirked. "You gotta dress like ho royalty." 1:30 p.m. Welcome to Red Vale. I drove in using a loaner car from the Resistencia, a gleaming white Lexus SUV with tinted windows and a fake parking pass that read, "Karen Corp Community Auditor." The guard at the front gate scanned the pass, gave a bored nod, and waved me through. I was in. Red Vale Hills didn't feel like a neighborhood. It felt like a movie set. Every lawn was the exact same length. Every house looked airbrushed. The air smelled like bleach and freshly baked cookies. Speakers hidden in the hedges played faint classical music on a loop. And every person I passed smiled too wide and blinked too slow. This place was wrong. 2:10 p.m. The HOA Cathedral. At the heart of Red Vale, stood the biggest house I'd ever seen. A mansion-sized structure with massive marble columns, a 10-foot fountain out front, and an engraved plaque that read, Redvale Hills, Homeowners Association Headquarters. Order, community, perfection. This wasn't a home. It was a shrine. And at the top of the stairs, standing in front of 2 iron doors, was Karen, wearing a white suit, holding a champagne flute, smiling like she'd already won. She saw me and waved. Ah, our little escape artist. I knew you'd come. You always do. I tried to play it cool. Just wanted to see the belly of the beast. You flatter me, she said. But no, this isn't the belly. She stepped aside, and the doors opened. Inside was a massive room, part courtroom, part boardroom, part cult temple. Screens lined the walls, showing live feeds from different neighborhoods across the country. Some were calm, others on fire. Karen walked beside me, as if we were old friends. Look at it, she whispered. The world is tired. Tired of chaos. Tired of noise. They want order. We're not forcing them. We're giving them what they secretly crave. I clenched my fists. You're brainwashing people. Karen shrugged. Marketing. 2:22 p.m. The offer. She turned to me and smiled again. I'll make this simple. Join us. Be our voice. You're clever. You've built a following. People listen to you. And if I don't? I asked. She leaned in close. I'll rezone your resistance friends into a commercial district, then legally seize their land, one by one. She handed me a tablet. It showed a map of the resistance camp. Her finger hovered over a red button marked Zoning Violation Protocol 7B. I realized what she meant. If I didn't join her, she'd erase them, legally. I looked down at the tablet, then at Karen's smug face. Then I smiled, because in my jacket pocket, I had my own tablet, and it was streaming everything. Live. To every resistance channel. To every HOA forum. To every disgruntled homeowner across the country. Karen had just confessed her entire plan on camera. She followed my eyes. Her smile vanished. What did you do? I clicked the screen. Send to all. And the tablet said, uploading 98%. 99%. 100%. Karen's face turned to ice. I whispered, You forgot one thing. You trained me too well.